In this video, I'm just going to briefly show you the different kind of layers that we're going to be working with. I don't want you to get all worked up if you don't understand it all. Don't worry if it seems like I'm going too fast. Don't worry if you don't have a chance to play with things, although you can always pause this, mess around with the file, and then restart the video. But I am going to go through this pretty quickly, and you're going to see all the things I talk about in future videos and future assignments. So I just want to show you the different kinds of layers that you're going to be experiencing. You can see, for example, there is a background layer. That background layer you're going to see is common to a lot of Photoshop files you're going to open up or you're going to create if you create a new file. If you have pixels in front of that background layer and you don't have any pixels showing through, you don't need that background layer. If you ever want to delete a layer or delete anything on a layer in the layer palette, you can just drag and drop it onto the trash can. That's going to get rid of it pretty quickly. You can see now that I've got 4 layer groups. Those are folders. We call them layer groups. We use layer groups to organize our Photoshop files. So there's 2 things that we want to do always when we create our Photoshop documents. We want to organize our layers, and we want to organize them in a way that is not just meaningful to us, but meaningful to anybody else who might be looking at your Photoshop files, because you're going to pass them along perhaps to another graphic designer, a printing company, or who knows who else. Anyway, when you do that, when you name your layers and when you group them correctly, it's beneficial for you because you can always find what you're looking for, and it's beneficial for anybody else who's looking and trying to work with your files. So you can see I've got this organized into 4 different groups. There's the headline group. I turn that group eyeball on and off, and you can see what's inside that group. You'll see when I turn that little arrow down, it contains 3 layers. It contains a type layer. I'll turn that on and off. With layer effects. The layer effects are this 3D and drop shadow. It contains a shape layer. I'll turn that on and off. And you can see it contains effects, a 3D effect and drop shadow. And then you'll see this glow. And I turn that on and off. And one of the things about this glow is you'll notice the word opacity. That's so you can see that up here, the opacity is set at 40%. Actually, this layer was created at solid white. Watch when I click on that drop down menu and I slide the slider all the way. Let me turn that off there. And let me turn that off there. And so you see this solid white with a soft edge rectangle. When I dial down the opacity, you're able to see through it. Notice I can go way down or anywhere in between. That is the opacity of a layer. If you dial down the opacity of a layer, all the pixels on that layer are going to start to show through the background images. So that is the headline text layer. You see there's a type layer, a shape layer, and that opacity layer, and there's layer effects that you can turn on and off. And if you don't see the layer effects, that's because this arrow over here by the FX has been closed up. It's just for convenience. You want to hide it so that your layer palette doesn't get all filled with all different kinds of layers. You can hide these layer effects. In this layer, this is the jet group layer, and you'll notice it contains the jet, and it contains this adjustment layer, hue saturation. And what this adjustment layer is doing is it's changing the color of the jet without really doing any damage to the pixels of the jet. Remember, if you haven't already heard, we want to do non-destructive editing. We want to do editing that doesn't do damage to pixels, because in this case, for example, maybe the client doesn't like that blue, and maybe I need to change it to another blue. And in order to do that, it's really easy with an adjustment layer. It's not so easy if I've really changed the pixels. So watch what happens when I turn the eyeball on and off. That's the original color of the jet. It's this red color. I have this hue saturation adjustment layer. You add adjustment layers down here where you see these are the different adjustment layers that are available to you, and notice there's hue saturation. That's how I added that hue saturation adjustment layer. And then when you're on the adjustment layer, there's a couple of icons here. This little right angle arrow is telling me that the adjustment layer is only being applied to the jet layer. Meaning if I didn't have that, it would be applying it to all of the images below it, not just the jet layer. This other icon here, if I double click on that, it's going to show me the properties, and that properties, it's hiding right now, so let me move it so you can see the jet. That properties is what dials in the different colors and how saturated they are or not, how dark they are or not. So that's what the properties palette is. It's the dialing in of whatever adjustment you're trying to do. And then right next to it is a layer mask, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So what I wanted to point out to you is that this is an adjustment layer. This is a pixel layer. The jet is a pixel layer. Above it is an adjustment layer. That adjustment layer is clipped with this little arrow, meaning it's attached to the jet layer. So that adjustment that we made is only being applied to the jet layer. We put those two layers in a group called the jet group. Notice here we have the ducky group. In that ducky group, we have the ducky with a layer mask, and then we have this shadow with an opacity. Now, if you take a look at the ducky group and the environment group, you'll notice that if I turn off the eyeball of the environment group, that is the sky and the dune. I'll turn that down for you so you can see. There's another adjustment layer there, and there's a lightning blending. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But you'll notice there is a sky, a starry sky, a dune, a levels adjustment layer, and lightning blending. I'll just turn these off so you can see. There's the lightning. There's that adjustment layer of levels. It made it darker. There's the dune. There's the starry sky, and you can see behind it is this regular sky that actually I don't even know why it's there, because we're not really seeing it in the image. That's what's in this environment layer, but I want you to notice that above the environment layer is the ducky group. That's where the ducky lives. And it is on top of the environment group, which means that those layers are actually in front. But it looks like the ducky is in back because this is a layer mask. And this layer mask is in the shape of that dune. Where you see black on the layer mask, it's hiding the ducky pixels. Where you see white on the layer mask, it's allowing the ducky pixels to show through. Black hides, white shows through. Black conceals, white reveals. The black here is being used to hide the pixels in the shape of the dune, so that even though the ducky layer is in front of the dune layer, it looks like it's behind. I'm going to just hold down the Shift key and click on that layer mask, and you'll notice it puts an X through it, and that essentially turns off the layer mask temporarily. And you can see the ducky layer now is clearly in front of that dune layer. But it looks like it's not, because the layer mask, the black pixels, are hiding the pixels in the shape of the dune. Here is a shadow opacity. Notice if I turn it off and on, it's just this little shadow right here. And again, I just wanted to show you that the opacity is 25%. And it also has a blending mode. This little guy right here, this little pop-out menu, you're going to see normal most of the time. But when you're doing shadows, you're going to see multiply. You're going to want to do your shadows with a multiply blending mode. More on that in just a moment. I'm going to turn that up. I'm going to turn down the environment group. And you'll notice that right up here, it says lightning blending. And if I highlight that, well, first I'm going to turn off and on so you can see, obviously there is the lightning. But if you can see by the thumbnail icon there, the lightning really is comprised of a bunch of black pixels. I don't see those pixels because I'm using a blending mode that hides the dark pixels. See, there's the blending mode. This case, I'm using lighten. Let me turn it to normal just so that you can see. And in fact, let me turn this other stuff off. And there you go, you see the image called lightning blending. Now notice I didn't do any selecting or anything else like that. I was able to effectively put the lightning in the image in a realistic way by just adjusting the blending mode. Instead of normal, I chose lighten. And look at that. What it does is it compares the layer that I'm on with the layers below. And it says, hey, with lighten, a blending mode, and that's what it means, blending. It's blending the layers. It's mixing them together in some way. In the case of lighten, it's mixing them together in the way that says, whichever layer has the lightest pixels, show them. In other words, you can see where the lightning is all comprised of white pixels. So between the lightning layer and all the layers below it, it's going to show those white pixels. But in the layer below it, where there are lighter pixels, it's going to show those. You may not quite get that yet. We'll work with it. Don't worry. But this is a blending mode, and notice how convenient it is. Imagine trying to select all of that. It'd be crazy. So here, with the proper blending mode, I can make these adjustments and I don't have to do any selecting, and it's non-destructive and it's really cool. That's basically it for going through this image. I just wanted to introduce to you the layers, and we will dive into this stuff more and more as we go along.